Imagine a blast so powerful that it could level entire cities instantly. The ground shakes, a massive mushroom cloud rises into the sky, and everything within miles is vaporized. But what happens to the bodies caught in these devastating nuclear tests? Today we're diving deep into one of the darkest moments in human history, the aftermath of the largest nuclear tests ever conducted. To understand the horrific impact of nuclear tests, we need to go back to the mid-20th century, when the world's superpowers were racing to perfect their nuclear arsenals. The first detonation? That was in 1945, but things quickly escalated. By the 1950s, both the US and the Soviet Union were conducting larger and more destructive tests in remote locations like the Nevada desert and the Marshall Islands. But here's the thing, these weren't just empty fields. People lived nearby. Soldiers, scientists, and even civilians were often in the direct line of fire, either knowingly or unknowingly. The Marshall Islands, oh, you might want to stick around for that part. Their story will shock you. But first, let's talk about the immediate effects of these nuclear tests. So what actually happens when a body is exposed to a nuclear blast? In tests like Castle Bravo, one of the largest in history, the explosion is so intense that anyone within a certain radius is instantly vaporized. The heat generated by these explosions reaches millions of degrees Fahrenheit. That's hotter than the surface of the sun. For those outside the immediate blast zone, the situation is equally terrifying. The blast wave, moving faster than sound, crushes bones, tears skin, and throws people hundreds of feet through the air. It's as if time stands still for a split second, and then everything is gone. But it's not just the heat and the force. There's something far more sinister: radiation. And that's where things get even more disturbing. Radiation is invisible, but its effects are horrific. Imagine being caught in the aftermath. At first, you might feel fine. No immediate burns, no visible injuries. But in the hours and days that follow, the true damage begins. Skin starts to burn, hair falls out, internal organs begin to shut down. This is acute radiation syndrome, or ARS. ARS destroys the body at the cellular level. Radiation damages your DNA, causing cells to malfunction or die. In extreme cases, people experience intense nausea, vomiting, and bleeding, leading to death within days. Survivors, though, they face an even longer road, with cancer and other diseases taking root years later. And it wasn't just the people directly involved in the tests. Fallout, radioactive dust and particles, drifted for miles, carried by wind and water. Entire communities unknowingly inhaled or ingested radioactive particles. The fallout didn't just affect a few unlucky individuals. The US government, for example, relocated the residents of the Marshall Islands before tests like Castle Bravo, but they returned the population to these contaminated islands after the test was over. The result? Decades of cancer, birth defects, and radiation sickness. Even the soldiers who were sent to witness these explosions were exposed to high levels of radiation. Many of them later suffered from rare cancers and debilitating illnesses. But it wasn't just in the Pacific. Tests conducted in Nevada spread radiation across the US, affecting millions of unsuspecting people. In some cases, the government even withheld information about just how dangerous these tests were. Let's hear from some of the people who lived through this. Testimonies from survivors paint a grim picture. Many recall seeing black rain, fallout mixing with the rain, falling from the sky in the hours after the explosion. People living downwind from test sites later reported high rates of cancer, miscarriages, and other health issues. And the worst part, many survivors didn't realize the connection between their illnesses and the tests until years later. Governments either kept quiet or outright denied the connection for decades. By the 1960s, the world began to wake up to the horrors of nuclear testing. Protests erupted globally, and in 1963, the Partial Test Ban Treaty was signed, banning atmospheric nuclear tests. But even that didn't stop the devastation. Underground tests continued for decades, still posing risks to those living nearby. Today, while nuclear tests are rare, the scars they've left are permanent. The world now stands united against these destructive forces. But the legacy of those early tests will live on for generations. So what's the takeaway here? Nuclear tests didn't just leave a mark on history, they left a mark on humanity, literally and figuratively. Lives were lost, bodies were destroyed, and entire communities were forever altered. The next time you hear about nuclear weapons, think about the human cost. It's not just statistics, it's real lives, real suffering, and real consequences.